So we've been talking about the accusations against Senator Al Franken and Senate candidate Roy Moore. In both cases, we have heard from women coming forward to support them. For some perspective on this, I want to bring in Lauren Leader Chivee. She is a feminist. She is the CEO of All In Together, and she is author of Crossing the Thinnest Line, How Embracing Diversity from the Office to the Oscars Makes America Stronger. You're like my dream guest on this topic, Lauren.
I'm so happy to be here.
Well, you know, I think it's been very interesting to many people, and I think they've also taken notice, not just my team here, noticing the resounding response from women in the corners of the embattled Roy Moore and in Senator Al Franken. It's feeling a little bit like a Tammy Wynette moment here. Stand by your man. What do you make of all of this?
I mean, there will always be women who stand by the men in their lives through thick and thin. I mean, there's an endless number of examples of that, whether it was Hilda Spitzer standing next to Elliot Spitzer when he was in trouble, or whether it's Roy Moore's wife. And, you know, Camille Cosby is another one. You know, I don't think it's representative of where most women are. I think, you know, relationships are complicated, marriages are complicated.
Yes,
I've long since given up judging what goes on inside anyone's marriage. You know, I would not cast the first stone on that one. But I do think, look, and we saw lots of women step forward. I mean, President Trump was elected because 56% of white, non-college educated women supported him, despite all of the allegations against him. So I think there are lots of women in this country are as diverse as the nation itself. We don't all have the same opinions, but I think in this case what we're seeing is the vast majority of American women are really taking this stuff very seriously and are saying enough. They relate to this. Many women, we know millions of women have stepped forward to say through the Me Too social tags that they've experienced some sort of harassment in the workplace. It's an epidemic, and it's one that American women relate to very deeply, very personally, and with a lot of anger.
I want to read just a portion of an op-ed in the Washington Post from a woman who describes herself as a feminist. She says, if we set this precedent in the interest of demonstrating our party's solidarity with harassed and abused women, we're only going to drain the swamp of people who, however flawed, still regularly vote to protect women's rights and freedoms. She is saying that she believes that Al Franken needs to stay in the Senate. Do you think there's a feeling of doing it for the greater good, or perhaps even, I don't know, I guess another way some people might even be looking at it, the devil you know is better than the devil you don't?
Well, it's really complicated in the case of Senator Franken because his voting record has been one that's been on the side of women. To me, it's not complicated. I think he has no business being in the Senate. And unfortunately, I think that until we start seeing some very visible examples of men paying a price for their bad behavior, there's no incentive for people to change their behavior. And I do believe this goes all the way back to President Clinton, the precedent of men behaving very badly and ultimately paying very little political price for it. I happen to be someone who agrees with a lot of Al Franken's policies. I do think he's been a supporter of women. I understand the conundrum that many on the left find themselves in, but I don't think it's complicated right now. And I appreciate that his apology was deeply sincere. I think it was. It's been accepted by his victim. And I do appreciate that he has been contrite and willing to subject himself to an ethics investigation. But the point is, it's such a distraction, first of all, at a terrible time. But second of all, I'd like to see some men really held accountable for these, for bad behavior. And we're not seeing nearly enough of that. And I think
the accountability aspect is so important because you can be contrite, you can apologize, and those are things you should do. But you still have to pay the consequences, and there still has to be accountability. Because I was thinking about that because I think we've been watching how Al Franken has apologized. Louis C.K. even said, I did this. I did these terrible things. But then there have been other people, Roy Moore, Kevin Spacey, Harvey Weinstein, probably the prime example of like digging their heels in and there's no way I did this stuff. Do you think that changes how we see, I don't know, how we're able to get to a point where we might be able to forgive and allow these people, I don't know, to continue their careers in some facet?
I mean, the reality is they probably will. I mean, there are very few examples of men, whether it's famous men or not famous men, actually really being held accountable or paying any serious price. I mean, I worry, obviously, I care a lot about the visible perpetrators in a sense, because they do set the tone. They're an example to the country. They're role models, or at least they should be, and they do demonstrate to others what is and is not acceptable in American society. But I also fear and worry very much about the women, the women who are not known and the men who are not known, and there are many of them, because in many instances, cases of harassment and assault wind up in secret arbitration, wind up in silence, and the women are often silenced. And so what happens is that men go on in corporate America to continue working with impunity, with very little consequences, and in many cases, women's careers are ruined. That has, in fact, been the case for many, many years with all of these high-profile cases, back to, Monica Lewinsky or even Anita Hill. The women have paid the price, and the men rarely do. And so on a macro level, I think it's time for some serious accountability, and I'd like to see men, feminist men, take that really seriously and take that on even themselves.
Time for this paradigm shift. Absolutely. I stand with 100%. You on that. 100%. Lauren Leader, Chivee, thank you. You delivered.
Loved
Appreciate
being on.
it.
Thank you.
I loved having you. We'll have you back.
Please.
You can count on that. All right.
Yes.